Almost 9 million people in South Florida rely, directly or indirectly, on the vast regional water system connected to Lake Okeechobee. Yet, most of them have never actually seen the lake. Even fewer have any idea what lies beneath its surface. For decades, what sat at the bottom remained largely out of sight and out of mind. Then, in December 2024, a routine but highly consequential decision briefly exposed a hidden reality. What followed was not just a water management event. It was a glimpse into a slow-moving environmental crisis that has been building for more than 70 years. It began on December 7th, 2024, when the United States Army Corps of Engineers opened the floodgates of Lake Okeechobee. The decision came from Colonel Brandon Bowman, who had only recently taken command of the Jacksonville district. He inherited a system under stress, a lake that was too high, ecologically fragile, and politically entangled. At the time, the lake stood at just over 16 feet above sea level, nearly 3 feet higher than what engineers consider safe. The cause was a 1-2 punch from Hurricanes Helene and Milton, which had drenched the region just weeks apart. The influx of water pushed the lake to a level that threatened the delicate underwater grasses that form the backbone of its ecosystem. By early winter, only about 4,000 acres of these grasses remained. A healthy lake would have nearly triple that amount. Bowman faced a set of options, none of them ideal. He could leave the water in place and risk further ecological collapse. He could discharge water east toward the Atlantic, west toward the Gulf, or attempt to send it south into the Everglades. Instead, he chose all of the above. The Corps called the move recovery operations. Critics called it something closer to environmental triage. Within days, the effects were visible. Along Florida's Treasure Coast, residents watched the St. Lucie River change color dramatically, from a translucent tea hue to something closer to black coffee. Visibility dropped to nearly zero. On the Gulf side, similar conditions appeared in the Caloosahatchee River. What had been clear, vibrant waterways turned murky and opaque almost overnight. Aerial footage captured the scale of the event. Vast plumes of dark water pushing out into the ocean, stretching for miles. Local communities reacted with anger and alarm. By the time the discharges ended in March 2025, tens of billions of gallons had been released into coastal ecosystems. The consequences were immediate. Seagrass beds were smothered. Oyster reefs were buried under sediment. Dead manatees began washing ashore. Years of ecological recovery were undone in a matter of weeks. And yet, paradoxically, the lake itself improved. As water levels dropped through the spring and summer of 2025, sunlight began reaching the lakebed again. Submerged vegetation rebounded dramatically, expanding to nearly 28,000 acres by early fall. From an engineering standpoint, the operation had succeeded, but success came with a catch. By the following spring, the pendulum swung in the opposite direction. Rainfall declined, and the lake fell to unusually low levels, below seasonal averages. Navigation routes closed. Farmers began drawing water for irrigation, even as the lake continued shrinking. In just over a year, the system had flipped from flood crisis to drought stress. What became clear was that the underlying problem had not been solved. It had merely shifted. The same pollutants that had been stirred up and flushed out during the discharges still remained in the lake's sediment, waiting, accumulating, ready to resurface the next time the system was disturbed. To understand why this cycle keeps repeating, you have to understand what Lake Okeechobee actually is. On a map, it looks like a simple blue circle. In reality, it is one of the most unusual lakes in the United States. Covering 730 square miles, it is enormous, yet remarkably shallow, with an average depth of only about 9 feet. In some areas, you can walk hundreds of yards from shore before the water reaches your waist. That shallowness is both a blessing and a curse. It allows sunlight to penetrate easily, fueling plant growth and making the lake highly productive. But it also makes the lake extremely sensitive. Wind can churn up the bottom. Heat can rapidly warm the water. And anything that settles into the sediment can be easily stirred back into circulation. For decades, agricultural runoff from surrounding lands has flowed into the lake. Fertilizers rich in phosphorus washed downstream from farms, ranches, and sugarcane fields. Over time, that phosphorus didn't disappear. It sank, Layer by layer, year after year, it accumulated in the lake bed. By 2020, scientists estimated that roughly 4,600 metric tons of phosphorus were stored in the sediment. Even if all new pollution were stopped immediately, that legacy load alone could continue fueling harmful algal blooms for generations. The lake, in effect, became its own source of contamination. Not all sediment is equal. Some of it is stable and compact, but other portions are loose and easily disturbed. The most concerning type behaves almost like a liquid. When disrupted, it releases a surge of nutrients into the water, far more than other sediments. When large volumes of water are pushed through the lake, as they were in 2024, that unstable layer gets agitated, and when it does, it releases more than just phosphorus. It releases toxins. For years, harmful algal blooms were treated primarily as an environmental nuisance, unsightly, smelly, damaging to wildlife, but not necessarily a direct threat to human health. That perception began to change in the mid-2010s. Researchers studying a mysterious neurological illness in Guam discovered that certain cyanobacteria, commonly found in algal blooms, produce a toxin called BMA. This compound can accumulate in the food chain and has been linked to neurodegenerative diseases. When scientists tested blooms in Florida, they found the same toxin. Further studies detected it in marine life, including dolphins and shellfish. In some cases, it was found in the brain tissue of stranded animals. There have even been instances where toxins from cyanobacteria entered drinking water supplies, prompting public health warnings. The implications are still being studied, but the concern is clear. Repeated exposure, even at low levels, could carry long-term risks. And Lake Okeechobee is a major source. The modern system that governs the lake was not designed with these risks in mind. In fact, it was shaped by a very different disaster nearly a century ago. In 1928, a powerful hurricane struck South Florida. At the time, Lake Okeechobee had minimal flood protection. When storm-driven waters surged against its southern edge, a low earthen barrier failed. A wall of water swept across nearby communities, killing thousands. The tragedy led to a massive federal response. Engineers built a 143-mile dike encircling the lake, transforming it from a natural body of water into a managed reservoir. The structure succeeded in its primary goal, preventing catastrophic flooding. But it also had unintended consequences. By enclosing the lake, it trapped everything that flowed into it. Decades of agricultural runoff, nutrients, and pollutants accumulated inside a system with limited natural flushing. Over time, the lake became less like a natural ecosystem and more like a storage basin. Efforts to manage it have grown increasingly complex. New operating plans aim to balance flood control, water supply, and environmental protection. But infrastructure limitations remain, especially when it comes to moving water south into the Everglades. Large areas of land south of the lake are privately owned, primarily for agriculture. That has complicated efforts to build reservoirs and treatment systems that could reduce harmful discharges. A major reservoir project is now under construction, with the goal of capturing and cleaning excess water before it reaches sensitive ecosystems. But it will not be completed for several years. Until then, the system remains vulnerable. When heavy rains arrive, the lake fills quickly. When it gets too high, water must be released. And when it is released, it carries with it the accumulated legacy of decades. According to officials, events like the 2024 discharge may occur every 5 years or so. Climate trends suggest they could happen even more frequently. Stronger storms, more intense rainfall, longer droughts. Each cycle adds stress to an already fragile system. The pattern is becoming clear. Flood, discharge, recovery, drought, and then back again. Meanwhile, the sediment remains. The nutrients remain. The toxins remain. What was once considered a local environmental issue is now recognized as something much broader. The lake feeds rivers, estuaries, wetlands, and aquifers. It influences ecosystems and communities across much of South Florida. When something goes wrong at Lake Okeechobee, it doesn't stay there. It spreads. The story of the lake is not just about water levels or engineering decisions. It is about history, policy, and the cumulative impact of decades of choices. A wall built to protect lives ended up containing pollution. A system designed for control now struggles with its own constraints. And beneath it all lies a layer of sediment that continues to shape the future. The next major storm will come. The lake will rise again. Decisions will have to be made. And when they are, the same questions will return. Where should the water go? Who bears the cost? And how long can the cycle continue? Because the clock isn't hypothetical anymore. It's already ticking.